Yesterday response we handled this holistically, started from birth registrations to bringing them to societal change through awareness and sensitization. Now, thank you for being part of the conference the third time. We are really very grateful for honoring us always and taking time out. So, we are going to ask a question through your global experience. So, from an international human rights law perspective, what makes child marriage so difficult to end today, and across the world, where do you see the most promising opportunities for change?
First of all, thank you so much for having me and for convening this important discussion. And in many ways, it was very interesting to listen to the speakers, because these challenges and opportunities that you are discussing are very much reflective of what we see also on the global stage. We should remember that actually child marriage continues to be a global problem of global proportions. It's not restricted really to one region only. And until today, we still have 640 million girls and women alive today that were married in child. So we're really not out of the woods at all. Having said that, and as also was just said, it is the point of departure that has been settled by international law is that child marriage is a harmful practice. And as was mentioned, we have proven harmful consequences of child marriage, whether it's the inability to complete schooling, because in almost all of the times, once that child is married, they withdraw from schools or are removed from school. And then the high risk pregnancies and the reproductive health problems and increased mortality rates. So that is settled. Now, having said that, there are a number of challenges, even where you have a law that outlaws child marriage or, let's say, discourages it. And perhaps we don't think about this a lot, but one of the main challenges is not all countries actually define what a child is. And I think Pakistan is one of them, is that there is no law that applies nationwide that says that the child is a person under the age of 18, in line, therefore, with what the Convention on the Rights of the Child says, which also Pakistan has signed and ratified. And that is, of course, then a problem because there are also other countries that have presented reservations, citing precisely religious and cultural norms, and saying that it's incompatible to define the child at 18 incompatible with the Islamic Sharia. The other issue is, and as was also mentioned, laws may exist, they may be great on paper, but they are not being monitored in terms of implementation, or we are not putting resources around making sure that people are aware of what the laws say and require, or we don't also take punitive action when these laws are broken. And so impunity, as you mentioned, continues to be a real issue. The other thing is that many laws, even though they may outlaw child marriages, do provide for exceptions. So they might allow for exceptions that allow child marriage to happen in certain circumstances. So for example, there are countries that set the age of marriage at 18, but allow exceptions because if the parents or the guardians or the courts or the judges approve that. The important issue of statistics and public records, including birth certificates, as was mentioned, is a huge problem, because you cannot, in many cases, verify the age of those that have been married. And I would say this is particularly a problem amongst, in countries that host large numbers of refugees or persons that escaped conflicts, because they might not be registered, the kids born may not be registered, and so we're not able really to monitor that. I already mentioned the issue of traditional customary laws and religious laws being continuously invoked. Unfortunately, they have also been cited as excuses for reservations to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Convention, that says very clearly that child marriage is a harmful practice and asks states to prevent that. The prevalent social views around sexualities and the stereotypical roles of girls and women as wives and childbearers, I would say this is something that is cementing and increasing and proliferating. And I would also add to that there has been a decrease in humanitarian funding to support humanitarian interventions amongst populations fleeing conflict and disasters. And so there are less and less resources for protection, for child protection, for providing sexual reproductive health rights to refugee populations or migrant populations. And one thing that is not sufficiently talked about also is the phenomenon of grooming. And grooming, of course, is a way, and you see that proliferating in many parts of the world, either by individuals or by state actors, state-affiliated actors, or armed groups or criminal groups. And the point is, of course, who do they groom? They groom girls that come from vulnerable contexts that have already suffered discrimination based on intersecting grounds. They might belong to a minority group or have problems at home, and they often get groomed and then also married at a young age. And in terms of opportunities, and I'll be brief, but I think, of course, the opportunities are not as many as the challenges, but I still see some opportunities, collective opportunities. One is that it continues to be an issue that is on our radar screen, that is at the of global importance. And to also show that, I think it's worth mentioning that both the United Nations General Assembly and the Human Rights Council of the UN, which is the kinship sort of human rights, both have recently issued also resolutions on child early marriage and forced marriage. And while they reassert what was said in previous resolutions since 2010 or so, I think there are some interesting points that are worth mentioning. So, for example, the last GA resolution in 2024 called on states to enable women and girls to leave marriages without leave marriages without financial or administrative barriers, so to make it sort of more affordable. And it also acknowledged once again that child marriage is linked to broader gender inequality and structural discrimination, and however recognizes informal and unregistered unions, and I think that was the point that you made as well. The Human Rights Council resolution of 2023 made a very strong point about ending impunity and abuse and providing shelter and protection during annulment or exit processes. And this is the missing piece in the whole discussion or policies is for laws. We have the laws, but then we don't have all the services that need to go with it in order to, first of all, help the child also see what we do now that it has been married and it has children, but also how do we work on prevention in the future. And it also emphasized the issue of birth and marriage registration and talked about the need for age-appropriate sexuality education, which continues to be a taboo in many countries. And that also makes it very difficult for a child, if, for example, it has an unwanted pregnancy, to consider other options other than marriage, including marrying its rapists, because there's so much shame associated with being married outside of, pregnant outside of.
From an international human rights law perspective, how should consent be understood in the context of child marriage, given that gender cannot give free and full consent, and some marriages should be treated as non-consent?
Because consent is increasingly being used to justify exploitative and violent practices, I've actually produced a guidance note on how we should deal with consent in issues of the violence and discrimination against women and girls. Now, there's a long answer to that, but when it comes to children, I want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 12, doesn't speak so much as consent, but scope of the importance of ensuring that children who are capable of forming views have a right to express them freely, including in any judicial and administrative proceedings, with the view being given due weight to the age and maturity of the child. So age and maturity is important, and the child must participate in all the processes that are relevant to it. But it also is clear that cultural, religious, or social norms cannot therefore be invoked to override the best interest determination, because the best interest determination has to be the central guiding principle in all the decisions that are taken on the child. Now, the role of parents was also mentioned in the Conventions on the Rights of the Child. So it did recognize the rights and duties of parents and guardians to provide appropriate direction and guidance, but again, only in a way that is consistent with the best interest of the child. So when you combine those articles, that means parents and guardians must take into consideration the views of the child, depending on evolving capacities, on issues that are important to them. But parental authority cannot be taken to be absolute, and it must be, it must enable, not replace, the child's decision making. And all that must also be read in accordance with a third important article in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is that children can never consent to sexual abuse or other forms of exploitation. And the state has the responsibility to take all appropriate measures to safeguard all the rights. And since the national law and the also Committee on the Rights of the Child and the CEDAW committee have stated that child marriage is unlawful practice, therefore that means you cannot consent as a child to child marriage. That said, I want to say, and I know this is a bit sensitive in this context, but if we're saying that children have to be consulted on all issues that are important to them, that means also sexual consent. So that means also that if they are within an age where they want to engage in sexual relations, they should also be able to express themselves, and we have to assess the maturity and so on. So therefore, many countries have now put a minimum age of sexual consent, allowing minors to enter into sexual relations, but they have put a lot of safeguards on that. And this is why I think both the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the CEDAW committee, while they emphasize that we should stress that the minimum age of marriage is 18, they have acknowledged that in certain exceptions, in certain circumstances, exceptions can happen, but that these exceptions have to be subject to judicial authorization, and they have to be also based on the free and full consent of the persons concerned, and never be permitted below the age of 16. So it's a difficult balance, kind of.
Thank you.